Welcome back to Face the Nation for some analysis of the growing international tensions in Syria, Russia, and North Korea. We turn to President Obama's National Security Advisor Tom Donilon. Fran Townsend was Homeland Security Advisor to President George W. Bush and is now a CBS News senior national security analyst. And Michael Morell was Deputy Director of the CIA and is a CBS News senior national security contributor. Mike, I want to start with you. What did the president accomplish with his attacks on Syria?
John, I think he accomplished two things. One is, I think he sent a very strong message to the Syrian president that he cannot use chemical weapons, that he cannot use sarin in the future. And I imagine that that will stick. I don't think Assad will use sarin again. I think that is deterrence worked here. I think the second message that was sent was to our other adversaries, primarily North Korea and Iran, that the United States, that this president will back up red lines, that he will protect the interests of the United States with military action if necessary. It's a very, very powerful message as well. I think what wasn't accomplished here was as important as what was. And what wasn't accomplished is we did not deter the Syrian president from continuing the war against his own people using conventional weapons.
Tom, what, now that this has happened, can the president do to take advantage of this? Is there negotiating leverage that's gained here in Syria?
Some, but I want to underscore what Michael said here, is that this is a very narrow, targeted effort aimed at deterring and punishing the use of chemical weapons. It does not fundamentally change the dynamics on the ground or the dynamics in the civil war in Syria. And it's important. That's important not to overstate what was accomplished. Indeed, we did set a line, enforce it. That's important to do, but we really haven't changed the underlying dynamics on the ground in Syria. He certainly can take advantage of this. I think Secretary Tillerson will in his trip to Russia on Tuesday of the coming week to try to use it as some leverage in terms of the discussions there, and really importantly in terms of holding the Russians accountable.
Fran, in terms of this very limited message they were trying to send, Secretary of State Tillerson, seemed to be really anxious to show just how limited it was. And when I asked him about the Assad regime, he basically said that's going to be up to the Syrian people, as he had before these attacks started. But the UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, said, quote, "In no way do we see peace in that area with Assad as head of the Syrian government." There seems to be a split between them there.
There does, John. But I think what's important to focus on here is, if your priority is getting rid of ISIS and defeating ISIS in Syria, let's be clear, the Russians have not, nor the Syrian government of Assad have been our allies in that. They've done virtually nothing to defeat ISIS. They've focused, as Mike points out, on sort of their own people and the internal civil war there. And so, frankly, in some respects, if you want to get the leverage out of the missile bombing in Syria, if I were Secretary Tillerson, I would not be going to Russia. Boris Johnson of the UK canceled his trip. If you don't want to get drawn in, then you need to build a coalition. I'd be going to the Arab Gulf. Our Arab allies during the Obama administration offered military assistance to remove Assad from power. They weren't taken up on it then. Now's the time to go and build that coalition in the Arab Gulf and have them take on and follow on to what our attacks were to try and leverage them.
Mike, what did you make of Secretary Tillerson's very clear two-step process? Get rid of ISIS, that's the priority. He almost sounded as if dealing with Assad on the barrel bombs and the humanitarian blockage was a distraction from ISIS. How do you see those two matching up?
So I think Senator McCain is exactly right. These are linked. You cannot ultimately defeat ISIS without getting rid of Assad. He has no credibility with the largest percentage of his population, which are the Sunnis. He will never get it back. He will never get their support back. And as long as that's the case, as long as he's there, that will feed extremists. Whether it's this ISIS or whether it's ISIS 2.0 down the road, Assad has to go. They are connected.
Tom, the Secretary of State's on his way to Moscow. Talk about Moscow and its role here, and then also the larger brief he's got to carry with him to Moscow as he meets with Russia.
Yeah. Fran makes a good point with respect to our relationship with Russia at this point, a couple of points. One is, and we've been slow to realize this, I think, in the United States, Russia is in an actively hostile posture toward the United States and the West right now, undertaking direct efforts to undermine the West and undermine the United States around the world, whether it be in Syria, in Ukraine, Crimea, up against NATO, Afghanistan, where they're supporting the Taliban. We've seen reports. So it's a very difficult time in this relationship. Second, I think if I were Secretary Tillerson, I would not go on this trip unless I were going to see Vladimir Putin. I don't think, frankly, that, and we've learned this through a lot of experience, that conversations with Foreign Minister Lavrov really get to much of anything. I think you have to be able to talk directly to President Putin, and Secretary Tillerson knows Putin. So it's a broader conversation. You know, they'll certainly have the conversation about Syria and what they might do going forward, holding Russia accountable. But we have a broader conversation to have with Russia about really this kind of actively hostile posture we have vis-a-vis Russia in the world right now.
Fran, do you think, you mentioned that Tillerson shouldn't go to Russia. Do you think he should not have gone as an act of punishment? Because essentially he's saying the Russians were complicit in basically a war crime. I mean, shouldn't the Russians be punished, I guess, if you're going to, on the one hand, say we're going to punish somebody for a war crime, and then you say somebody's complicit?
Right. Well, I actually don't think Secretary Tillerson went as far as you just did. I don't think he said they were either complicit or incompetent, basically, and he didn't say it. I think he should have. I think it's clear they were on the Shayrat air base with the Syrians, co-located. There's no way they were incompetent. They were certainly complicit, and that means they're complicit in a war crime. And so I do think, both because they were complicit in the chemical weapons attack and because there have been reports now that Vladimir Putin, to Tom's point, has said he will not see Tillerson. And so the combination of those things makes this trip to Moscow, in my judgment, a total waste of time. You might as well actually try to build a coalition that can do something to end the civil war.
Can I talk about the war crime for just 30 seconds?
Sure.
Yeah. With the point that Senator McCain made, there needs to be a lot more focus right now in terms of accountability and gathering evidence and pushing forward on war crimes prosecutions in Syria, including potential Russian complicity.
That's right.
Michael, let me switch to North Korea with you. Where do things stand with North Korea? It seems to have gotten just a lot hotter, obviously, their actions, but also the rhetoric coming from the administration.
John, there's a bit of a misperception in the media that I want to clear up. There's a perception in the media that the threat is down the road, right? That it's 2020 or 2022 when they'll have a deliverable nuclear weapon. They have that now. They have nuclear weapons that work. They have short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles that we know that work. They have two variants of an ICBM that they have not tested, but they've deployed one of those. The assessment of the United States is that they can mate a nuclear weapon to a missile. Both the former DNI said that, and the commander of NORAD said that. So the threat is now, and there's three threats. One is use, one is possible sale to a third party, and one is a loose nuke scenario if the regime ever collapses. What happens to those nuclear weapons? So the threat is now.
Tom, what does the president do? What are his options if that's the case?
Well, a couple things. First of all, every single indicator with respect to North Korea, I think, is negative right now. In terms of the numbers of weapons, as Michael said, the capability, and in terms of developing over a course now of missile testing, the ability to strike the United States or its allies. And this proliferation point is really important, I think, to underscore as well. It's not just a direct threat issue, it's a proliferation issue. Going forward, it needs a lot more attention. One is that I do think that we can significantly increase pressure on North Korea through economic and other kinds of pressure. Michael and I worked very closely together on the Iran sanctions efforts here. We do not currently have in place, we haven't had in place for a relevant period of time here, the kind of regime-threatening economic sanctions that I think you could put in place. Second, I think we need to continue to build up our defenses and our presence in the region. Third, I think there is, importantly, a conversation to be had with the Chinese about the various scenarios on the Korean Peninsula going forward here. I don't think that took place in Florida this past week, but we really should have that conversation with China. And fourth, to really communicate that, in fact, all options really are on the table with respect to dealing with this problem.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all of you. We'll be back. These aren't going away. And we'll be right back with our political panel in a moment. Stay with us.